Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to quite possibly the best movement guide that you guys will ever find for Valorant on YouTube. And this is not a joke whatsoever. As you guys can tell in today's video, there's going to be no editing, no fancy editing like usual in my videos, because today we'll be dropping some crazy knowledge on you guys, and I mean some genuine crazy knowledge, so stick around for that. Usually, this type of knowledge would be behind a paywall for most coaches, including myself. Usually I would only share this type of knowledge with my students who have paid for the coaching. But today I decided it was time to, start revealing this stuff to the public, because I feel like a lot of the clients that I have and the students that I have, they're very satisfied with the coaching, and a lot of them leave really good reviews, and they actually rank up pretty fast and see progress pretty fast soon after my coaching. And yet I don't have many students coming through simply because it's not reaching the broader audience, as you guys can probably tell from the subscriber count and whatnot. So I figured I need to drop some true hard to find knowledge, basically. And I think here we are, today's video, that's exactly what we're going to do. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Now, with that being said, you guys have to understand something, right? When it comes to movements in this game, and once again, there are no cuts in this video, so it's kind of like as if you're on like a live call with me, how my coachings would normally be. So with that being said, one thing everyone needs to understand when it comes to movement is there's many different types of fundamental movement. But the issue is that most of the people today in lower elos want to focus on things like, bunny hopping, or even just like counter strafing and strafing during a gunfight. This is unfortunately like the most asked question when it comes to, movement in this game. And this is a question that a lot of lower elo players tend to focus on, when in reality, that is just not the problem. And this is the issue, is that when they're focusing on the wrong issue, they tend to develop a false sense of security with all the other main issues that they have. And this is an issue I see a lot of players have in lower elos, is that they have a false sense of security with the fundamentals of the game. The fundamentals of movement are already very, very wrong for a lot of these players. They're doing everything wrong, and yet they've developed this false sense of security, most likely because they've seen YouTube videos of, high elo coaches telling them that this is how they should be peaking and whatnot, when in reality, it's not how they should be. Now, to defend those coaches, it's very likely that their audience primarily consists of players from, like bronze and iron. So for those players, that type of peaking method might be tailored to them. But unfortunately, these videos obviously are public, so a lot of people from all elos will see them. And that is where a lot of struggle comes in, because it kind of confuses the player on what is fundamentally correct and how to properly peak angles. So in today's video, I will be clarifying and clearing up every single possible thing that you can imagine when it comes to the fundamentals of movement in this game. So let's just go right into it, right? Let's not waste any more time. So starting off here, let's just say that I am on offense and I need to clear this tree area, right? So I'm kind of walking up cat, or I like to call it budgie, but whatever. And I need to clear all of this area. So first, you need to identify one thing. Anytime you're going to be clearing any angle, right? This is, again, a fundamental of Valorant, is clearing places, right? You want to know how to clear angles. A lot of coaches will teach you that you need to do something like this, right? They like to call it slicing the angles, right? This is a common thing that I've heard from coaches, but unfortunately, this only really works in lower elo. This is not how you want to peak, or sorry, not even, when I say lower elo, I mean like the lowest of the lowest elo is when you would ever do anything like this. But anything, even above bronze, you should not be peaking like that. So let me show you guys how to actually peak angles. So let's say the target area is tree that we need to clear. The first thing you need to do is identify what are the common angles that you need to worry about. So a lot of lower elos from like diamond and below, there will be people playing here. This you won't normally find in higher elos, unless there is a setup there, because a lot of the times in higher elos, people actually use their brain. They won't play in angles that they can't escape from. So unless they have someone, set up with them, right? Ready to, flash for them or smoke for them or whatever it is to get out, they might play there. So how should you actually clear this if the way that you've been taught is not correct, right? If this is not the right way of clearing things, if even this is not the right way of clearing things, then how should you clear these angles efficiently? Well, here's something you need to understand. There's something called off angle. Some of you guys may know, may have already heard of it. Maybe you guys haven't. Basically, an off angle is any angle on the map where the enemy is unexpected to be holding. So for example, when I'm in a lower elo, right, I might just clear like this, for example, in lower elos, right? And that is because you, in like silver and stuff, most people don't know what an off angle is, right? But as you start climbing the ranks, you do definitely have to worry about off angles. So even here could be an off angle. This could even be an off angle. This could be an off angle. This could be an off angle. This could be an off angle. And this could be an off angle, right? So all of those areas that I just showed you guys could be off angles. So what is the issue with peaking like this? Let's jump into that first so I can, make you guys understand. The issue is when you are peaking like this, right? You have to understand it's fundamentally impossible for you to peak 1 pixel at a time, right? Like if you're going to peak like this, there's just no point in playing this game, right? Because you're just eventually going to die. You know what I mean? Like you would be busy peaking this and then someone could swing you from here and kill you, and you're just taking up too much time doing that. So that is not efficiently how to peak. And then the way that they teach you, which is, kind of slicing it like this, is also not efficiently how to peak, because the issue is that they could be at anywhere on this off angle, right? So there is no point in you peaking an off angle like this, because they could literally be, you could, for example, just to give you an example, right? If I peak this and then I peak like this, right? My crosshair could be here, but they could have been here. Does that make sense? They could be standing here, but because of the way that I'm clearing this off angle, I'm peaking like this, and now I have to make the readjustment. But the person standing here, they just tap your head, right? So why is that not good? That's precisely why. Because off angles, there's so many of them, and they could just catch you off guard, which is the whole point of the off angle if you were clearing it like this, right? Now, I will say though, I'm kind of speaking from like a little bit of a higher, not higher, but like a higher elo perspective here, simply because most players, they're not even going to bother clearing off angles in the first place in lower elo, which is, a problem in of itself. So how should you properly do that? First off, you need to understand something called jump spotting, right? This is a really good, method to clear off angles and to clear even common angles, right? This is just a good method, but this is very situational. So you wouldn't always use this. So for example, you're not going to see me go like this and then go like this and then go like this, if that makes sense, right? I might do it for the first one if I want to get some quick info on if someone's holding like a tight angle on me, right? But then after that, I'm going to start clearing properly. So what exactly is clearing properly? Let's get into the juicy part now, right? So let me give you guys a demonstration, right? What you want to do is you want to jiggle peek all of the off angles that you see that you're worried about, right? Because in theory, in reality, it's impossible for you to worry about every single off angle that exists because there's so many of them, right? And that would take 10 years. So based off the information that you've gathered, if you notice that, maybe there's some players on the enemy team that like to play off angles and you want to just be careful, you should always be jiggle peeking off angle. So for example, me just jiggle peeking this right here, I've already cleared it. Does that make sense? I did it so fast. You notice, like, I've cleared this. Notice how based off my crosshair placement, I didn't even have to keep it placed in the angle that I'm jiggle peeking, because again, jiggle peeking, the goal is not to kill the opponent, but rather to get quick information, right? So I just jiggle peek like this, right? I use my shoulder peek, just shoulder jiggle, and I've already cleared all of this area by just doing that shoulder jiggle. This whole area has been cleared, right? So already we've cleared anyone on an off angle that comes before the common angle. Does that make sense? So again, I say this is a common angle mostly because there are people in diamond and below that will play here solo, from what I've noticed, right? So with that being said, as an example, right, I've shoulder jiggled the off angles, and now comes the common angle. Here is another issue that I see people use when they peek common angles, is they'll peek the common angle like this. What is the issue with this? Alright, so let me tell you guys what the issue with peeking like this is, right? So the issue is actually very, very simple to understand. When you peek like this, you are essentially making it very easy for the person that is holding a commonly held angle to kill you, because most likely their crosshair placement is going to be something like this, right? And when you are doing the peeking, although technically, right, you do have the peeker's advantage here, right? So in a lot of cases, you may actually get them. But if this player is good, they will try to negate that peeker's advantage by holding like this. And if they're holding like this, for example, right, the peeker's advantage would just not be as powerful as you think, and therefore they would have an easier time, simply because although you are peeking a commonly held angle, there is still quite a lot of space for them to hold this commonly held angle from. Right? So for example, they could be holding it from here, or they could be even holding it from here, right? How do you know which peak they're holding it from? So when you peek like this, for example, and you just do a fully commit to this peak, if he's standing here, he kills you. Does that make sense? Or if I peek like this and he's standing here, he kills you, just because he has the better crosshair placement already. So how can we fix that? How can we increase our chances of getting someone on a commonly held angle? Well, this is the rule, right? And just remember this rule for everything. For off angles, jiggle peek. For commonly held angles, do a 2-step peek. Now, I kind of overextended that more than it needs to be, but this is kind of what a 2-step peek would look like. Now, what is the difference, you might ask, right? Let me explain to you guys. So there's something called minimum velocity and maximum velocity in this game. To put it very, very, very simple, right? When you peek like this, you are not using maximum velocity when you're peeking like this, right? And therefore, you are essentially just kind of doing a 1-step peek, right? And that's fine. Right? You know, there's nothing wrong in certain scenarios. You may have to do, you know, like 1-step peeks instead of just full wide swinging. And usually when I would recommend a 1-step peek is if you're clearing an angle that doesn't really have any room for improvement. So for example, right, just one angle that I personally always clear with a 1-step peek is if I'm, you know, taking space here, I'll clear this angle with the 1-step peek. The reason for that is because, as you can see, there isn't really much room for improvement here, for them to be positioned at, because even if they're positioned here, right, they won't really see me if I'm clearing from there to just this. Does that make sense? So in those type of scenarios is when I would recommend fully committing to the fight. That's just a personal thing, though. If you want, you can be more than welcome to jump spot this too, blah blah, whatever you want to do, right? Now here's the thing, though. When it comes to 2-step peeks, this is the difference, right? It's called having maximum velocity. Whatever wall you're going to peek, you want to start at least 2 steps behind, and then you want a full peek like this. So when you're full peeking, you're full peeking out like this. So to give an example, right? Anytime I peek a commonly held angle, this is something I unconsciously do because I've trained myself to do it, right? You don't have to line it up and whatnot. Just once you understand, like, you know, what 1-step is and what 2 steps is, right? The difference. And you can start positioning yourself to peek angles like that. So for example, when I'm peeking this angle, I almost always win the fight, because what I do is I don't peek like this. Like a lot of people might peek in lower elos, right? They might peek like this, right? What I peek like is I start far behind and I just like to full swing into it, right? And not too far out to where, you know, I'm exposed to other angles, but like kind of like this. Does that make sense? There's a difference when you peek like this at full velocity versus when you just kind of peek like this. Now, obviously, it takes some time to master, right? Because a lot of times what will happen is when people are doing full peaks, they might expose themselves to other angles. So it does take some time to master the 2-step peek. But the 2-step peek, you're going to be moving much faster than you would if you're just doing a 1-step peek. Also, a lot of times you'll peek a little bit further out, which gives you a little bit more time to readjust your crosshair as well. Because a lot of times they'll be holding close, and if you peek a little bit further out, they have to also make the adjustment. So just keep that in mind, right? It's called, there is no real term for this peek, so I call it a 2-step peek because that's genuinely what it is. You're just going to be using 2 steps instead of just 1 to fully peek the angle. And you're going to be starting at least 2 steps behind. Now, this is something that can be experimented with, right? There is no like magic number per se, but what I like to say is that The idea is simple. You want to have as much velocity as possible when you are peaking commonly held angles. It's just that simple, right? And when you're not peaking commonly held angles and you are, trying to clear off angles, jiggle peak, jump spot, right? That's like your best friend for off angles. So those are just some basics that you should keep in mind when it comes to the fundamentals of peaking. And keep in mind, guys, you can apply this anywhere that needs to be applied, right? Anywhere. This is not just a tree example. It's not just the B main example. This goes for any commonly held angle. I'll give you another example. A really good one is, for example, this, right? A lot of people would say, there's this common misconception, actually, I find it kind of funny, is there is something that people say, like, trust me, angle advantage does exist in this game, but it's funny how people will take an angle like this and this, and some people will be like, never peek this angle, or some people will even tell the person here to never peek this angle because you're just at a disadvantage and you won't win those fights. I think that is just kind of silly, because that can be said for any angle in this game, right? Just because you are not winning your fights at that angle doesn't mean that someone else is not going to win their fights at that angle, right? So that whole concept I just find silly. The main thing you want to keep in mind is just knowing how to peak, right? And understanding the skill level that your elo is at. So what do I mean by that, right? If you're in diamond or below, I promise you these two-step peaks are going to work every time. Even in the higher elo, they work a lot. But in the highest of highest elo, right? In the highest of highest elo, here's the thing, right? It's not always common, but it's more likely that they'll start taking notes, mental notes, of how you like to peak certain angles, and they'll start holding for that, right? So they might hold more wide and even moving to side to counter anyone that's doing a full velocity peak. But that's something that you don't have to worry about, because once again, this video is tailored for those who are diamond and below. That's the main culprits I see of lack of movement in this game.